Welcome to the Autonomic Healing Podcast. I'm Tom Pells.
And I'm Ruth Lorensson. We'll be unpacking what it looks like to activate your brain to holistically manage stress and trauma that bring healing to the mind, body, and spirit.
Being free to live authentically as humans.
Thank you for joining us. Let's get this conversation started. Well, we're here on the Autonomic Healing Podcast in our series that we've been doing, the ABCs of Thriving, and we are on the letter N. So tell us what we're talking about today, Tom.
We are talking about nominal functioning, which doesn't sound very inspiring and, thriving. Nominal functioning? It almost sounds bland and neutral.
It does.
Yes. So there's a story, always a story with things. And when I was a boy, I was 5 years old, 1961, and the whole space race and space exploration was really becoming a thing. Is John F. Kennedy, the president, and the landing on the moon within a decade, which actually happened. And all of that was really becoming a thing. The Russians had put Yuri Gagarin into space, and space was a thing. And it was huge. So also around in the offing was Star Trek. And
I watched Star Trek. I have watched it, so I remember watching that as well.
And I was a Trekkie as a boy.
I can imagine. Yeah.
And I was just fascinated by the space exploration, about the possibilities. Bear in mind, this is also in the context as a boy. I'd had tremendous trauma. And our nation was in terrible upheaval. Segregation, racism, the Vietnam War, coming out of the whole atomic bomb and all the rest of that, duck and cover, climb under your desks, which would be like, why? I've thought about that. Why am I ducking and climbing under my desk if it's an atomic bomb? I ain't gonna do a lot of good, but it's something, I guess. Anyway, the whole space was opening up. My mom sold World Book encyclopedias, and they put out a very special, it was like 18 inches or 24 inches long and 18 inches wide. It was just this beautiful full color thing about all those pictures of the astronauts and everything, space. And I just ate it up. And there was Star Trek. And I loved Star Trek. I loved that it was everybody getting along. Yeah. And everybody so very different. And there were men and women and different nationalities. And everybody was, and it was this 5-year mission to explore and go where no one had gone before. And that just totally captured me. I was a boy, and I would climb, part of the neglect, most of the day during the summer. My parents would have no idea where I was. I was just out and about. And I remember there was this one tree, and it was an amazing tree. It's very tall, and you could climb right up to the top of it along the trunk. And then there was a set of branches that went out, and they literally formed a seat. And I, in my little childhood fantasy of all that, would sit in that chair way up high. And I was Captain Kirk. I was at the bridge of the Enterprise. And I would just play all that out. Anyway, my point is that I loved everything space. And it was an event, unlike today. It was an event when a human being was in a rocket and it lifted off. That was an event. And everything stopped and we watched. And I remember listening very carefully to Houston Control and all the rest of that. But I remember they kept using a word, and me and words, That's my great love is words. But they kept using a word, and I had no idea what it meant. But it was very important, I knew. And then I found out why it was so important, and that was nominal. And they would keep saying in that scientific voice, very plain, bland with unemotional, all systems nominal, trajectory is nominal, heat, pressure is nominal, everything was nominal. And I'm going, what the heck is nominal? And why is it so important? Because apparently nominal is very critical to all things space. I wanted to know. So I got out the dictionary. I'm a kid, but, reading dictionaries and encyclopedia. Nominal is a variable, a factor. It could be a number. It could be a way things are functioning. And nominal means it's good. Nominal means like with the trajectory, that spacecraft, if its nominal trajectory is following the planned just right trajectory, it's not deviating off course either way, or when the trajectory for re-entry was nominal, it was going to come in at just the right angle for a safe landing and not either skip off into space or be too shallow and then burn up on re-entry. And then fast forward a few years from there, and Apollo 13, and they've got a 14-second burn, and they had to get it just at the right time in the right way so that they hit that trajectory so that they would come in safe. And they didn't have any more than 14 seconds. Everything was nominal, even though in that case, everything else was not nominal. They weren't in the landing capsule. They were in the lunar lander. They're not landing on the moon. They're trying to land on Earth. Everything was wrong, but they had that 14-second window to get it right. And they did. And just so nominal, while it sounds bland and neutral, everything's nominal, is actually about thriving. Not nominal, maybe surviving or not surviving.
Yeah.
But nominal. But so often in life, things are not nominal.
Yeah. So you're saying it's almost like there's a spectrum of a space, a boundary, so to speak, what the nominal boundary, where if we stay within that boundary, that the trajectory is going to be thriving.
Yes.
But if we edge out of it, that's when it becomes nominal.
Yep.
And I remember when we were talking about this earlier.
Subnominal.
There you go. Is that a word?
Yeah.
Never know with you, Tom.
No.
But we were talking earlier about how, like actually even a couple of weeks ago I had a rental car and it was a little Hyundai and it was brand new, so I have never had a Hyundai before, but we was just driving it around and it had like all of this safety features all over it, and so it sounds great, but I was driving and it was like beeping at me if both my hands went on the steering wheel, and I remember thinking, oh, for goodness sake, shut up. But actually it was like alerting me if there was this chance of me going out of the nominal beneficial thriving space of driving a car, i.e. we don't want to crash, right? We want to get from A to B alive.
Or cause somebody else to crash.
Yes. And so, it would be in the wing mirror, it would be beeping if I was just signalling to turn and there was someone behind me. It's actually very helpful.
Oh, yeah.
But these beeps, these red lights, and I can imagine the same sort of thing would be going off in, a spacecraft, or, if they started going out of the nominal range, so there would be beep,
sensors
beep, or
alert.
some sensors.
Yes, we have an explosion, Apollo 13, in the this particular gas, and this is not, and it's bleeding off into space, and you're not going to be able to breathe. And
And actually, I think, if we translate all of that into just our lives, there is, what we're saying is that in thriving, there's this nominal space in our lives and throughout our lives, not just like today, but this trajectory. Just think about that spacecraft, it's going somewhere over these 5 years. And we have these years ahead of us, this trajectory, and there is this nominal space. But if we are kind of going a couple of degrees out of it, or there will be these alarm bells going off, and it might be that, and I think people know them often, so it's like, I think for me, like, I know, for example, if I push myself too hard in work, and I've done this with like, putting in like 40, 50 hours a week in, and then I've got a coursework assignment that I'm doing over the weekend, and I push and push and push, and then I'm sorting kids out, and then I can feel something in my body going, it's like a wah, 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 like something's going off in my head going, stop, Ruth, because if you keep going, you're going to burn out. And I think we've probably all experienced those things, right? And that's just in burnout. But there might be other things. There might be, it's the decisions we're making, or
relationally.
Yeah.
Houston, we have a problem. All aspects of life. Health. Our body, when we're not doing healthy things for our body, the warning system says this is not nominal. Yeah.
So our bodies alarm us. They send these signals out to really with the purpose of allowing us to make those adjustments, allowing us to come back into the nominal space to thrive. But one thing that I was going to ask you, and I think that this is, and it's really an observation of stress and trauma, and this, we have so many people, and this is part of my story, really. I think for about a decade, I feel like, and I didn't have the words for it at the time, but I do now, I was in a perpetual cycle of fight and flight. So the alarm bells that started going off became my normal.
Yeah.
They became they weren't normal, but I became so used to that in the heightened anxiety in my body, and which caused all sorts of problems. But it was almost like I created a new normal that was very dysfunctional with this perpetual cycle of fight and flight. And I think a lot of people are in this.
There is a word for that.
Yeah.
Typical.
Yes.
Not normal. Typical.
Yes. But I think a lot of people are in that today. So you see people regularly as a therapist that are in these spaces, and part of the amazing work that you do with autonomic homeostasis activation is allowing that to be kind of regulated back into the nominal like in our physical bodies,
Yep.
So I guess what happens when those alarm bells, we don't hear them, they become so normal we don't hear them anymore, I guess that's the question. What would you got any comments around that?
It becomes so typical that it's like, this is just how things are. And we just live within that when we don't have to. And the alarm bells go off, and one of two things happens. We either become desensitized to them, or we become hypersensitized to them. And then the stress and need, here's the tsunami of stress, becomes distress and discontent. Then we may avoid and isolate, and you're hearing in this escalation of not dealing with it or being hyper-reactive to it. And then what we avoid and isolate becomes resistance. I don't want to deal with that. Defiance, I'm not going to deal with that. Some form of anger shows up. And then we're not assertive. Then we just want to feel good. And the tsunami of stress is an escalation of that flight or fight reactivity. And we're not in nominal trajectory.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're either flying out into space or
with no hope of recovery, or we're going to crash and burn up in re-entry. Yes.
So I guess the question then, Tom, is like, how do you, if you're in, well, okay, so you might be in a space where you've got the alarm bells going off and maybe you're not into that perpetual fight and flight
no,
space.
It's just the stress and need.
Yeah.
And then nominal functioning. And then is it going to go into the distress and discontent or not?
Mm-hmm. And I guess the question, I think one of the questions I have is how do we know what the nominal space is?
Mm-hmm.
Like what is that?
Yes. The nominal space is where we are authentically functioning and things are beneficial.
So how do you know then when, I guess, how do you know when you're, so we got the alarms, right? So that's a good sign, you know, and I think we've all had our versions of that.
Yep.
But there are some instances where it's like the alarms bells have been going off for so long, like we just talked about, that they become part of what the noise around us and we don't even pay attention to them anymore. So how do you recognize that and how do you get back into what's beneficial, I guess is the question.
I think the key is emotions. Because emotions are like this tripwire or this system within us that help us know either that we are in nominal functioning or not. Emotions just are. And I really want to affirm that. Emotions just are. Now, we may have had all sorts of messages, probably, about emotions. You can't have them. Don't. Or only these emotions and not those emotions.
Yeah.
Or just lose it and become really emotional. But emotions just are when it comes to being human. They just are.
I just want to acknowledge that that's such a good way of, like, I just think it's so helpful to have that spectrum because what you've just said, I would imagine most of our listeners would identify with, you know, we're all going to identify with one of those things. And so somewhere along the line, we've got to just be, you know, like just are. So that's super helpful.
Yeah. And it just because somebody may say, well, you have a right to your emotions and all emotions just are. You don't have to go any further than that. So here's how emotions function. Because when we are not in that nominal, everything is functioning the way it's supposed to function state, we have emotions that are consistent with we are in it or we are not in it. So for those who have AHA and they can identify when the stress and need to become distress and discontent or escalated further, they can have their AHA moment. Let the brain return the whole system to nominal functioning. But even if you don't have that, it's not that you can't respond and keep from skipping off into space or burning up in re-entry. A helpful thing to do is just to stop. Just stop for a moment. And then ask the question. The first question that I recommend asking is, what am I feeling? And I'm probably feeling something. We're always feeling. That's human. The question is, what am I feeling? And if you just stop and close your eyes, you could even do it right now, listeners. You just stop, close your eyes, ask the question, not for you to think about and figure out with your mind, but as a prompt for your brain to tell you and inform you. And if you stop and you ask, what am I feeling? And just listen, your brain will tell you. Then the second critical question is to ask, is that healthy? Is that healthy is a question that addresses and assesses, is it nominal? Because if it's healthy, it's nominal. If it's not healthy, it's not nominal. You don't have to judge the emotions. This is not about judging them. This is simply about assessing them, dealing with them for what they are, so they don't deal with you.
Mm-hmm. That's so good. So basically, that it's like this is a way of understanding whether you're in the nominal, beneficial, thriving space or not.
Yep.
And so to be able to, the emotions are the indicator, and to ask that question of, I love the word assessment, because I think that that's so helpful to just assess. It's not saying you've got to suppress your emotions, or not saying you've got to act out on your emotions. You're just asking a question like, where is this healthy? Which will allow you to determine whether it's in the nominal space or not. Yeah, that's so helpful. And then I guess, and I just want to say as well, because, and I loved what you said earlier about this isn't, some people have been told certain emotions are healthy, and says this isn't that. Like, some of the emotions that could be seen as very positive emotions, and like
healthy
love
and beneficial
or joy,
not.
You could actually ask the question about those.
Absolutely.
And they might not be healthy.
No.
So it's
and
like
your brain itself knows.
Your brain knows.
And it will tell you.
And so this is a really good way, especially if I think in some ways with things like burnout, or, the little alarm going off, if it's that obvious, that's easy, right? We can make those adjustments. But if we've gone down the path so long, and we've actually been in the alarm space for too long, and we're not, it's like we can't, we have a desensitization to the alarm. This, what you're saying about emotions, paying attention to the emotions will help guide us back, basically.
Yes.
So what do you do?
So we stop.
Yeah.
What am I feeling? That's a question for your brain, not a question for you to think about and figure out. Your brain already knows. What am I feeling? Listen. Your brain will tell you. Then you ask this next question. Okay, this is what I'm feeling. Is that healthy? Not, do I like it? Do I not like it? Not, is it understandable or not understandable? Not, yes, I should or shouldn't. Has nothing to do with that. Is this healthy? Is an assessment of nominal or not nominal. Then stop and affirm nominal by breathing. Because if you're in the flight or fight, one of two things tends to happen to breathing when we have the flight or fight trigger. We either stop breathing and we don't breathe, it's like holding our breath, or we breathe too much and we hyperventilate. We're breathing too fast. One of those two things tends to happen. So you're in some situation. You want to assess, am I nominal and am I thriving, or is this not nominal and I'm not thriving, and maybe I'm even wondering about surviving? What am I feeling? Is that healthy? If the answer is healthy, that your brain tells you this is healthy, you may or may not even like it, but it's healthy. Good on you. Enjoy.
Just
System
be
is
in that
nominal.
space, yeah.
Yep. But if the answer is this is not healthy, then breathe. You take the breath in, a deep one, from down in your abdomen, through the nose, out through the mouth. You want to complete that full respiratory cycle. That's why in through the nose, out through the nose, in through the mouth. Out through the mouth does not complete the cycle. In through the nose, out through the mouth, takes it all the way through, brings oxygen into the body. How important is breathing and oxygen to human survival?
Very.
Very. And how significant is it for thriving versus just surviving?
Yeah.
Very.
Mm-hmm.
Here's my analogy, and I think it works because it's consistent with the human stress response. Like with Apollo 13, Houston, we have a problem here, and rather than being overreactive, flight or fight, just start going through the systems, setting things up, and they had a 14-second burn that they could make. They didn't even have remote telemetry with Houston control, so this was not going to work. It was all analog, and they aimed their little viewfinder right on the horizon that would give them, and they had the opportunity for a 14-second burn. So when we are at risk of either burning up on reentry or skipping off into space, overly emotional or not, or avoidant, get that pip right on the horizon, and you got a 14-second burn. Use it right then. This isn't healthy. You do that for 14 seconds. You'll be at peace.
It resets.
It does.
Mm-hmm.
Because you're now working with the way the system's designed.
Yeah.
And that breathing simply affirms it. Yep.
That's so good, Tom. I love that. And I think there's just the language of the nominal space. And I love the fact that it doesn't sound like fancy or flashy. It actually sounds really normal. But that is, there's something about that is true. It is, we want we don't need to be, it's like the sober-mindedness again. It's like we don't need to be more or less. Let's just be in the nominal space. But because the nominal itself is thriving.
Yep. And have at those healthy emotions. Go crazy with them. Because you can't go too crazy with healthy emotions.
Yeah. It's such a good practice to do, even if you're not feeling like, even like you said in this episode, just take a moment, just try it. Like
periodically throughout the day.
Yeah. Because it will help you. It's like it's a constant way of making tiny adjustments, right? Back into the nominal space.
Yep.
Love that.
Thrive.
Great. Well, we'll
go where people have gone before.
I was waiting for that. You got it in right at the end.
Yep. You've been listening to the Autonomic Healing Podcast.
Join us next time as we continue in our conversations with Tom. If you're interested in pursuing your own autonomic healing journey and want to find a practitioner, visit our website, innerworkings.org. See you at the next episode.